Everyone, and welcome to PAEA's July WebinART, Making Paint from Ochre Pigment, a STEAM lesson. Tonight, we will hear from Maureen Feineman, a Geosciences professor at Penn State, and Heather McCune Bruhn, an art history professor also at Penn State, and learn how to make watercolor paint from powdered ochre pigment, along with a discussion of the geological and art historical significance of ochre. Registered participants will receive a Google form link via email after the event to fill out for their 1 hour of Act 48 credit. This webinar will be recorded and available at a later date on the PAEA website. Before we begin the webinar, we are asking participants to mute their microphones and keep their video off during the presentation. Those controls are located in the bottom left corner of the controls bar. We are also asking everyone to sign in on the chat roll. Please use the same name in which you registered for this event. The chat roll can be found along the bottom in the controls bar as well. Signing in will ensure that you receive the Act 48 link. You may also use the chat roll for questions, and there will be a Q&A period after the presentation. Let's get this webinar rolling. Presenters, take it away.
Maureen, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. Hello, everyone. I am Maureen Feineman, and I am a professor of geosciences at Penn State. And the WebinART that we're going to be doing with you tonight is something that grew out of an interdisciplinary class that Heather and I teach together. It's a cross-listed class about rocks, minerals, and the history of art, looking at how the rocks and minerals that I study end up being used as materials to make the art that Heather studies. So this is a project that we've been working on a bit over the past couple of years, and that we've had a lot of fun with and kind of grown together with. And Heather, I'll let you give your intro.
So while Maureen and I were developing our art history Geosci 107 course here for Penn State, my son was a 4th grader at Park Forest Elementary School here in State College. And I found out that in 4th grade, at least around here, and it might be a statewide thing, kids have a sort of geology of Pennsylvania unit. And one of the things that they did was they visited Center Furnace Mansion, which has an iron furnace, and they talked about the iron industry in Pennsylvania. And I called up his teacher, who happens to go to church with me, Melanie Wassam. She's the art teacher at Park Forest. And I said, could I come in and do an ochre paint making demo with the kids and tie this into their geology? And so we arranged for a time for this. And then it was actually Melanie who got the idea to present this at the PAEA annual meeting in October, where the 3 of us co-presented. And so that's what led to this WebinART. And so we're going to kind of follow the order that we used when we presented at PAEA, with Maureen giving a geosciences background. And then I've got a little video I prepared at home with my son, and I've got a few PowerPoint slides. And then there's also a bunch of documents that you'll be able to download or that'll be emailed to you.
Okay, let me go ahead and open up my talk here. And start. All right, great. So again, what I'm going to talk to you about right now is the geology of ochre. This is a pigment that has been used for tens of thousands of years, one of the very first pigments to be used by humans for creating works of art. So from a geological perspective, ochre is a mixture of minerals that includes iron oxides, and it's these iron oxides that give the ochres their colors. Hematite, for example, is a red iron oxide, essentially rust, and some oxyhydroxides like goethite and limonite. These are respectively brown and yellow ochres. These are in a matrix of clay, usually like kaolinite, or carbonates like calcite and dolomite, or even sulfates like gypsum and anhydrite. And this is an example of a red ochre that is that kind of very oxidized hematite-based red ochre on the slide there. And this is kind of the science side of this. The geology side of this can really be scaled up or down depending on what age group of students you're working with. So for younger students, it may be appropriate simply to say that ochre is basically colorful mud. It's nice red or yellow, brown, orange mud. If you're working with a little bit older students who've maybe had some chemistry, then you can go into a bit more detail about the chemistry of transition metals and oxidation of iron. So iron, like other transition metals, can exist in a variety of different valence states. So it can be in either a 2+ or a 3+ state, and that means that it can be oxidized to varying extents and paired with varying numbers of oxygen atoms. And the color of the iron oxide actually depends on the oxidation state of it. So again, hematite, which is sort of our poster child iron oxide, is red like rust, and in fact that is simply that is what rust is that fully oxidized Fe2O3 with that nice earthy red color to it. Move forward there. So on the left here, we have some examples of the red ochre hematite. Again, this is Fe2O3. It has iron in its fully oxidized state, so iron 3+. Whereas on the right side, we have an example of limonite. Limonite is a yellow ochre. This is FeOOH with some water mixed in with it as well. This is what we call an iron oxyhydroxide. Some of the iron is oxidized here, and some of it is in the more reduced state of iron 2+. So again, it's kind of same basic components that we're working with here give a variety of colors, all in those nice, rich, earthy tones. So we can see a variety in here. This is from a single hillside in Provence in France. This is from Roussillon. And you can see over on the yellow, we have some yellow ochres in the middle of the frame, some red, and up and to the right, some purplish. Usually the purple means that there's some manganese oxide mixed in with the iron oxide that gives it that richer purple color. So another metal mixed in with the oxides there, and gives us just this gorgeous palette of natural colors. Ochre itself is a product of weathering. So when iron-rich minerals are exposed to oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere, they're weathered and oxidized over time to form these colorful iron oxides that we see. In this picture here, this is from a place called the Devil's Marbles in Australia. These are very old igneous rocks, and as they've been exposed to the atmosphere, the iron in those rocks has oxidized. Again, essentially it has rusted, and it gives that beautiful orange color to the surface of the rocks. If you were to cut into these rocks, they would look kind of like regular granite on the inside. So these newly formed oxides, because they're already products of weathering, they're really stable and unchanging then over millions or even billions of years from the time that they're formed. And this is one of the really appealing things about ochres as pigments is they don't break down, they don't change color over time because they are already in that final state. Kind of everything that is going to happen to them has already happened to them. And so they'll remain with that same intensity of color for throughout time. And then just to put this into kind of the context of a critical thinking question, and I think this is a nice way perhaps to introduce this, is to say why, knowing what we know about ochre, why do you think that this was among the first pigments to be used by humankind? And there are a few very kind of very simple reasons for this. There we go. One is that it's naturally occurring, and another is that it's abundant at the Earth's surface. So this is something that you, depending on where on Earth you are, but in Africa, Australia, Hawaii, parts Georgia, for example, and even in parts of Pennsylvania, this is something that you can walk outside and find just laying on the ground. So it doesn't take sophisticated mining or processing. It's a highly saturated pigment. It's got those deep, deep colors, and a little bit goes a long, long way. It requires almost no processing. Heather's gonna show you a video of how you can go really kind of from mud to paint in a few easy steps. And it's stable at environmental conditions. It's already a product of weathering, which means what you see is what you get. Even 70,000 years from now, you'll still have those same colors remaining. All right, I'm gonna stop my share now. That was my little geology intro. All right, Heather, on to you.
Okay, so I'm unmuting myself now, and what I'm going to do is show you a video that I put together with my son, Will, on our back porch at home, just because it's a little easier to demonstrate things that way than it is to try and do it all right here in front of Zoom. So bear with me while I set that up. Maximize this. Hi, my name is Heather McCune Bruhn, and I'm coming to you from my back porch on a relatively hot summer day. And I want to talk about paint. Normally, when we think about paint, we think about a watercolor set like this one. This has 24 different colors that you can use just with water. And as you can see, my husband has been painting recently, and you can see some of the colors that he's mixed and played with. You might also think of something like a pre-mixed bottle of paint. I got this as a sample at the Pennsylvania Art Ed Association. Similarly, a tube of paint. This is something that really has only been in use since the 19th century. And the paint tube is something that allows for plein air painting. Prior to this, every batch of paint had to be mixed individually, and they might carry them in little pig bladders, but that didn't last very long. So the tube is quite an important invention. And then, of course, particularly if you're in an elementary classroom, you might be familiar with the powdered tempera. These are all sort of familiar ways that we think of paint. Today, however, we're going to be talking about ochre. And ochre is iron ore. It comes in a variety of colors. Usually you'll find sort of orangish or reddish or yellowish brown stones when you take hikes around here in Pennsylvania. As you might recall, if you took a Pennsylvania history course or learned anything about Pennsylvania technology, or you've just seen all of the old furnaces that are around in many parts of the state,
you'll know that Pennsylvania was an important source of iron ore for early industry. And ochre comes in the form of kind of sandy rocks, and you can use them kind of like a crayon to make some marks. You can see some marks here on my paper. Sometimes it comes in a more powdery form. And here I'm shaking out some powder from some ochre that we collected in the woods, and you can see that it almost has like a charcoal or a pastel effect. Here's my finger, nice and yellow. And then I also have some lab-made ochre pigment. Here we have some yellow ochre made in a lab. This is from Kramer Pigments in New York. And some red ochre. Look at that gorgeous deep red color. Ochre is super plentiful in nature, and because it's very abundant and found very close to the Earth's surface, you can just find it again walking along trails here in Pennsylvania. It was humankind's first pigment, and we see it being used for human adornment and for painting caves as early as 100,000 years ago. In Europe, it's being widely used by about 40,000 years ago. So a very important early art material, and it's still being used today because ochre is the product of a weathering process. And so once you collect your ochre, it's a very stable color. You can heat a yellow to get more of a reddish color, but other than heating it, you really can't change the color significantly. So it gets used in things like tinting for concrete, paint for houses. You might wonder why all of those homes that you see when you go to parts of Europe are in ochre tones. Well, that's because it's cheap and plentiful. Similarly, you'll find a lot of ochre kind of paint if you go to colonial houses. So how do you get ochre from the state of the rock or the dirt that I've collected in that bottle to the state of this lovely purified pigment that we see here and here? That's, of course, the lab-made pigment, but here's some of that collected ochre that I made some marks with earlier. How do you get to that point? We're going to start with a process called levigation, and that's really just a fancy name for washing. And so what I have are 2 ball jars with lids, and I like the plastic lids that you put on rather than sort of the jelly lids that are being heat sealed on. And what I did in this one, this has some collected dirt from the woods near our house and water. And if you shake it up so that it's cloudy, and I need to shake this one pretty hard, you might see that there's a sediment on the bottom. What you want is water that looks pretty well mixed. This kind of looks like a morning coffee. And you pour that colored water into another container, and you leave any of the heavy sediment down at the bottom of the jar. So that washes out the sand. Oftentimes you find ochre as a mixture of like a sandstone. And you might have to crush your stone a little bit in order to get to this point where you can levigate it. And then you pour that into a new jar, and what you'll notice in this jar here is that I've allowed that water to settle. And what's left on the bottom is a pretty pure pigment, and on top we have fairly clear water. Now, if I were to shake this up again, I'd end up with water like the water that I had initially poured in, and you see it takes several hours. So what you would do with this separated one is you would pour off that clean water, and then you would take that sort of sediment sludge and put it into a shallow pan. I've got a pie pan that I use for this purpose. Stick that in a warm, sunny location like a windowsill, and what will eventually happen is that the excess water will evaporate, and you will end up with fairly pure powdered pigment. You might have to levigate more than once in order to get the purity that you want, but that's one of the simplest ways to obtain an ochre pigment. Of course, even simpler today in the era of UPS and FedEx and the Postal Service is to order it online from Kramer Pigments, and then you get this lovely amount. It's very inexpensive per kilogram. I think it's about $10 a kilo, and this represents, you know, only a tiny fraction of what I purchased from Kramer. Comes in multiple colors, in reds and yellows and oranges and some browns, and it's very easy to work with. And this is what we're going to work with next. Today we're going to be showing you how to make ochre pigment, like I showed you from Kramer Pigments, and you see that in the background on the left, into watercolor paints that your kids can actually take home. And the two key ingredients that we need are gum arabic, and you can buy it on Amazon in a food grade form. This is organic acacia Senegal powder. This is gum arabic. You can also buy it from Kramer Pigments in a slightly finer grind powder. You can also buy it in chunks because it is resin from the acacia tree. And gum arabic is something that you might be more familiar with as an additive to foods. It's used in ice cream, in candies, and all sorts of things to affect texture. And I actually, I think the Penn State Creamery ice cream kind of relies on gum arabic for some of its creamy texture. The other thing you're going to need is glycerin. And I have here a big bottle of glycerin, also obtained from Amazon. Both of these are fairly inexpensive, and they go a long way. And there will be a recipe available for you, but basically you take gum arabic and water and mix them very well. And then you add a little bit of glycerin. And then you can also add honey, which I did to this, and a small amount of clove essential oil. And the reason for the clove oil is that it acts as kind of an antibacterial, and it keeps your paint medium from molding. This is the medium that we're going to be using to mix with our watercolors, or with our pigment to create watercolors. It makes really nice watercolor medium, and they will re-wet after they're dried, just like the ones in the commercial watercolor trays. This is also what the ancient Egyptians used. They've done studies on paints that have been found on sarcophagi and other things, and they're pretty sure that some sort of a plant gum or resin was being used as the medium, and Egypt is the right area of the world for gum arabic to be growing. And they believe also that in some cases they were using honey as well. Both of them make for a very good paint texture. Now I want to introduce you to my son, Will. He's helped me with a lot of these demos in the past. And as you can tell, he's making a really doofusy face. He actually helped us develop our very first paint demo with Maureen's son. And we made a wonderful mess in our front lawn, which was a great deal of fun. So he's going to show you how to mix up some paint. We have a little bit already here in our mortar and pestle. You can see that we've mixed up some of that yellow ochre. Will's going to mix up a little bit more, so go ahead. So we're going to take some of that Kramer yellow. And normally you don't want to have your students pouring it in like that because you'll go through your pigment really fast. My suggestion is small plastic spoons. And you'll see that we've got a little dry there. All right, go ahead and put in some medium. And we're just using like squeeze condiment containers. And you're mixing this up. You see how beautifully the pigment mixes up, and it's because it has a very, very fine texture. You end up with something that's kind of the texture of Hershey's syrup, kind of Hershey's chocolate syrup. We'll show you what it looks like to paint with that, but that's incredibly saturated. All right, well, so now we're going to take some powdered red pigment. We've already got some on our plate here, and we're just using a cheap melamine tray that we got at Goodwill, and putting a little bit of medium on that, and then mixing it with a cheap plastic palette knife. And these are great because you can get about a dozen of them for something like $5. So it's not difficult to outfit an entire classroom with these, and you don't have to worry about them rusting the way that you do with the metal ones. And you can be pretty merciless with the palette knife. You can bend it and squish it and move it around. It's wonderfully flexible, and it doesn't snap.
Particularly fun,
and you can see that you end up with a really nice.
Sorry about this, guys.
Result is a non-toxic pigment or paint that they can take home and use at home even after it dries out. And so that's where a bunch of cheap portion cups, like you would get ketchup in at a restaurant, come into play. And these are also very cheap when purchased online. And so Will's going to show us how to pour our pigment into these and save it to take home.
This one's a lot easier than the red.
Yeah, with the pouring spout, it makes it really easy with this particular mortar and pestle set. And you can see that's got that wonderful texture, kind of like chocolate sauce. And I've got a spatula that we can use. We don't have time right now, but you can use a rubber spatula to scrape everything in. And then we'll move this over, and we're gonna fill up. So this is a pretty easy way for the kids to do it. They can scrape it up with their palette knife. We can also, we can also move things off of our tray and use the spatula if you want. You want to pour it off the corner like it's a spout?
Yeah, that might be easier.
Yeah. That's fine. We'll clean the table. This table has seen far worse.
Yep.
All right, so I'll hold this, and then you use the spatula. You want to grab the green spatula? But just this little amount of paint that you end up with, we'll stop here, is really, it's about equivalent to what you would have in a watercolor paint pan. So a little bit, again, goes a very long way. Now, if air and moisture get into this, even with the clove oil, it might mold at some point. It might be better to actually let it dry with the cover off. But it's a great thing for the kids to take home. You might want to bring like some Ziploc bags or something so that their backpacks don't get completely full of paint. But again, it's a really, really fun project. And if you give them plenty of time to play with the paint, they'll really enjoy it. There's our guy.
I hope you enjoyed that. And I have another quick little video. Unfortunately, when I was editing, I didn't get the original one of Will showing off how to use the paint in there. So I'm going to just play that for you briefly. So now let me set that up and share my screen again. Okay, so there we go. All right, so bear with me for another minute and a half.
So now we get to try out the paint, and this is a lot of fun. So here, Will's going to use some of that red in a fairly concentrated form.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Show us how saturated that color is. Look at that. Now he's going to start using more and more water so that you can see just how incredibly saturated this really is, because we're using pure pigment. And he hasn't added any paint. All right, you want to you add some water and then do some washes for us here? Yeah. Any yellow? Oh, I like it. It's cute. You want to use some of that wonderful mustard yellow? And the yellow really does look like hot dog mustard. I had a lot of New Jersey students in my classroom who really appreciated that last year, back when we could do demos live. See that wonderful color. And that's in a fairly saturated form, hasn't been diluted with water. So, Will, you want to show them what it looks like diluted? There we go.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. I apologize for the shaky camera work, but I think for, quick and dirty backyard video, it turned out pretty well. So at this point, I think we can take questions. I do have a PowerPoint that I put together that has some images that you could use for a quick lesson in your classroom. Like Maureen's PowerPoint, that's something that'll be shared with you. But I think we can kind of open up the floor at this point.
Yes, that was great information. So we definitely have time for questions. So you may use the chat roll to type in any question or comments that you have for our presenters. And you may also unmute yourself and ask your question live. It is your choice to leave your video off or on at this time, as we are leaving it up to you to decide on your level of privacy, as the recording will be housed on the PAEA website.
Oh, and I should say that Will is kind of an old hand at these demos. He, for 2 years in a row now, has helped me give a materials demo to my art history survey students here at Penn State, and has endured like 10 groups of 24 students each coming in over 2 days. And I let him run the paint station. So he tells all of these 19 to 21, 22-year-olds how to make paint, and orders them around really well.
He's done a great job at the Festival of the Arts as well, at the Art of Discovery booth there.
Yeah, that's been fun. So any questions for us?
Again, feel free to unmute yourself and speak, or you may certainly use the chat if you would like to. And I believe our presenters probably have their chat open as well.
Okay, so I see a question from Diane that she wants to know if any backyard soil would work, or does it have to be ochre? I know that there are quite a few people out there who are making their own paint just from colored dirt. And in fact, if you Google it, you will find, especially out in areas like Arizona and Utah, where you get, some really spectacular colors in the soil and in sandstones, that there are quite a few people making their own pigments. But I've also seen folks like up in Vermont. I know a painter in Michigan who, every time he travels, if he sees a cool color on the side of the road, he's got like little Ziploc bags and spoons, and he collects stuff and then takes it back to his studio.
I've have been known to do that, yeah.
I keep resisting the urge, but there's some purple rock near Phillipsburg that has me pretty excited.
So not every soil. I would first of all say try it with any soil, and you'll find that with many soils it will work. The one thing that doesn't work so well is if you have a lot of organic material in your soil. So the kind of soil that would be really good for growing, your garden or your potted plants is not going to be the best kind, partially because those organic components are going to float, and so the levigation process is really difficult to carry out there, and they don't give you that same kind of fine textured. Also, if you have a harder rock or a coarser sand, you may need to grind it up a little bit before you do the levigation. So a mortar and pestle like Heather showed is that's the way a geologist would do that, is by grinding it in a mortar and pestle. If you don't have that, you can bash on it with a hammer, crush it between a couple of bricks, roll it with a glass bottle or a rolling pin. So you want to get that fine grain size, and then again, most types of soils and rocks, you will find some nice iron oxide kind of pigments in them, but there are some that aren't going to work so well.
We actually have our students do this for our art history Geosci course online. So one of their first assignments in the class is to basically go through the steps that I showed in the video and then show us what they painted, and tell us about their experience.
Those are a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Robin.
Hi. This made me remember when I saw that bowl, the mortar and pestle to kind of grind it up. Back years ago with my fourth graders, I wanted to use up all these broken pieces of chalk pastels, and I had the kids grind them up in bowls, like margarine bowls with a rounded rock, and use that to mash them, and with the different colors. But we made egg tempera, and then they made paintings with it. But could I do this? If I had scraps of chalk pastels that I didn't want to just throw away, or little pieces the kids couldn't use anymore, could they grind that up and you mix these things with them and make paints that way too?
I think it would work pretty well. Yeah, I mean, if you have some that are sort of oily or otherwise kind of resistant to water, you might have a little trouble. So maybe test it a bit. But I think they're good.
Yeah, like the chalk pastels, the pastello sticks, or you end up with all those teeny little broken.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
I would think so. I would think that should work. So chalk is commercial chalk is usually gypsum, which is a sulfate that's kind of the base for the chalk, and that is one of the same minerals that is commonly found in the kind of gooey, muddy matrix of the best ochres. So,
and we found that was used as a filler in some of the ochres we tested in the lab too.
Even in some of the synthetic ones were mixed with gypsum and sulfate minerals. So I would think that would work well.
Oh, yeah. Awesome! Thanks.
And also, if you don't want to go through the trouble of mixing up the gum arabic solution, it's possible to buy pre-mixed watercolor solutions. They're more expensive than they should be, considering what the components cost. But you could also use something like Mod Podge, or a big thing of one of the GAC mediums from Golden Acrylics or something like that. You could treat it like any pigment. So you could mix it with oils, you could mix it with egg, with pretty much anything.
I had one of one of my students in last fall had gone out to Michael's and bought a bunch of different paint bases. So she had one glitter base and one pearlescent base, and she made a bunch of different kind of lusters of paints with her ochres. That was kind of fun.
Yeah, I've been seeing if you guys have ollies around you, every now and then in the art supply area of ollies, they have 4-packs of Crayola paint mixing mediums, and there's one that has glitter in it. There's one that's pearlescent. There's one that's matte. You know, basically kind of like the different forms of Mod Podge, but even cheaper. And it's really fun to see how the same pigment actually looks with different binders, because it will really affect the color. If you feel like using hot melted wax in your classroom, if that feels safe, encaustic is a really beautiful way to work with the ochres too.
And I think, I don't know if you just said this, Heather, but I think we've had a few students try various egg, either yolks or whites or various things too.
Yeah.
That's probably getting a bit more expensive and intensive for a classroom purpose, but if you're just playing around, it's a fun thing to try.
I saw Kelly's comment here that it would work into an interdisciplinary unit on Native Americans. I know, oh, who was it? It was Claire, wasn't it, who had the, she had something on one of our posters at one point about a Native American costume where the leather had been tinted with ochre.
I think that's right, yeah.
So yeah, that might be, you know, very, very interesting. I mean, there's so many places you can go with this. Yeah, I mean, if you like the work of Cézanne, he was working in Provence, you know, very close to the sources of the ochre pigments, and he's painting landscapes that are dominated by ochres just in the color of the landscape, and then probably using local pigments to paint them. So if you really want to geek out about the material, you know, that's kind of a fun way. And then like rock paintings, like the Fremont people out in Utah, you can see very close to that cliff scene I had pop up in the video in Utah, you can find rock paintings made with those pigments. Anybody else?
Oh, I'm sorry, what did you said ollies? We can get the kits with the meat.
I mean, you know how ollies is sort of random.
Yeah,
so you
I
can
know.
never really count on anything.
Listen, give me something to do. What am I looking for?
But they're little rectangular boxes with 4 little bottles of basically like water soluble painting medium in them. And I think they're meant to be used like with, you know, poster paints or powdered tempera, but you can just as easily mix them with these ochre powders.
Okay.
And then if you're not familiar with Kramer Pigments online, it's KREMER. And they're a fabulous source. I think I have them on the recipes page. And if not, I'll make sure that I send you guys links for them and some of the other good purveyors.
Okay.
And there are, again, you know, just keep your eyes open when you're out driving around or going for a hike. Anytime you see those really rich brown and yellow and orange, they're usually kind of muddy soils, or sometimes sandy soils or sandstones. That is often going, almost always really going to be an iron oxide that you can grab and bring home to play with.
Yeah, we have a creek bed in a local park that my son goes to. When Maureen and I started doing this, my son got all of his friends together in the woods, and they all came back bright orange because Will had told them, my mom found out that 100,000 years ago, people used to paint their bodies orange with ochre. So I had to apologize to a bunch of other moms. Sorry, Robin, we interrupted you.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was just thinking when you said that, we have a trail we like to sometimes walk and bike on, and there's this one, if you go far enough up the trail, a couple miles, there's this like hillside, and it always looks very red and orange, and so we could probably collect that, then you're saying, and bring it home to do this with.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, just bring Tupperware the next time you're on the trail.
I'm gonna do that. This has been kind of a boring summer where I feel guilty when I'm not doing something for school in the fall, but I don't know what to do because we don't know what fall's gonna bring. Right. So I feel in this weird state of limbo that you can't really, not sure what to be doing. So it'll give me something to do. Thank you.
Well, and what I love about making the paint is that, if you buy the cheap little portion cups like you would get your ketchup in at Arby's, the kids can take that stuff home. So they love it when you can, take something home that they made, and it's not just the artwork, it's materials to play with too. I'm hoping we get more discussion or questions.
Yes, if there's anybody out there with questions, don't be shy. This is a lot of great information.
Well, if you guys don't mind, I can, I've got the short PowerPoint. I could always talk through that because this is one of the things that'll be available. Does that sound okay?
Absolutely.
All right, so I will share my screen once more. So this is a PowerPoint with all of my own images. And let's do, okay. So now you should be seeing the full view rather than presenter view. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so this is just an introduction to ochre. This is an area in Utah. This is at Dinosaur National Monument. And you can see, just like in that Roussillon slide from Maureen, just the sheer variety of colors that you can find in ochre. And then I have just some nice facts. We know that people in Central and Southern Africa were using ochre for bodily adornment. They were painting their bodies. There's traces of ochre that have been found on shell beads from necklaces that had come off of people's bodies. And some examples of ochre, if you go to Cornelissen and Sons, which is a wonderful art supply store just around the corner from the British Museum in London. They have shelves and shelves and shelves of pigments as well as pre-mixed colors. But they're one of these shops that, would have served people like Turner and Constable back in the day, back when all of the artists were making up their own colors or going to color men in order to obtain them. And then on the right this is a reproduction of one of the Spanish cave paintings and it's a reproduction at the Altamira Museum in northern Spain. Here is one of the curatorial staff at the Fitzwilliam Museum at Cambridge pointing out some of the painted areas on a sarcophagus, and I have a link to the source for this picture for you. It's part of a really intensive research project they did on their sarcophagi, but I think you can recognize that red ochre and the yellow ochre there, and then those are malachite, probably copper-based pigments in the greens. And then this is just a shot from a tutorial I took at Kramer Pigments in New York on making your own paint, and just what one of the ochres looks like when you've got it mixed up. This is a very special ochre that was obtained in Iceland. And I really loved kind of that, you know, sort of sexy paint picture. So I had to throw that in. So you'll have that, that PowerPoint to be able to use. I guess another thing you could also say about ochre is that, you know, unlike the cadmium colors and some of the more modern pigments that are fading now and causing all sorts of problems with painting conservation, the ochre colors don't really change. They stay very, very stable. Well,
Any more questions?
Maureen, or any questions?
Yeah, I think
You did such a good job at filling everybody in.
We've been doing this for a while. We did, gosh, we've done what, 3 years or 4 years worth of demos at Arts Fest, and we did an Earth Day. We've done a bunch of these in with various age groups.
All right. Looks like Diane does have a question. It says, I have one last question. So Diane, you may certainly unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can type it into the chat, your choice.
With epoxy resin. You know, I have no idea. That might be a fun experiment.
So I would think so.
It's not super reactive, so I mean the one issue you have with the ochres is, you know, you don't want to get them super hot because the yellows will change color, but that's kind of it. You know, I've used them with encaustic and oil and casein. I haven't tried egg tempera yet, but I'm going to. They're stable in fresco.
I think my suggestion, if you were going to try that, would be to use a very small amount of pigment. So just remember that these are very rich, saturated pigments, so you don't need a whole lot. And I think if you just had a little bit, then it probably wouldn't affect, you know, the only thing I would worry about with epoxy is if adding too much might interfere with the epoxy setting up. But I think if you just used a small amount, you could add color to the epoxy without affecting kind of the properties of the epoxy itself.
I saw Angela's comment here that making watercolor is easier to handle, and that's part of what I found attractive about it, is that, you know, it's cheap, it's non-toxic. One of the nice things about doing it for a public demo like at Arts Fest is if somebody's toddler decides to suck on their fingers after doing it, you know, they're only getting some honey and some food additives, and, you know,
Yeah.
It's
Those little
unlikely that anything except a really weird looking diaper is going to resolve, you know? So all of those dangers you worry about with children in classrooms.
And it will, I guess one thing I've learned from working with this over the past few years is it does wash out surprisingly well. Like it will get all over you when you're working with it, but it doesn't stain as much as you might fear that it would if you get your stuff off it in the wash quickly.
Yeah. We did have a mishap with one kid who had a favorite shirt when we were doing this in the 4th grade classroom. And he was well on his way to a meltdown. And Melanie had, I think, just, you know, some Dawn dishwashing detergent in her classroom. And, you know, she gave him a loaner t-shirt, and his favorite t-shirt was good as new after like 5 minutes of care. Oh yeah. Yeah, where do colors come from? Yeah. Yeah, really in the caves, it's ochre and charcoal. Those are the first colors that are used. And I mean, that's kind of the dominant colors until they start finding other sources of color.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. It's always fun for me to step outside of my science box for a little bit and talk to other people. So
we're glad you did.
Yeah.
It's been nice to do this. It's good to do something that feels more productive than just trying to escape the heat today.
Yes. Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Heather and Maureen, for such great information. And we really hope that everyone enjoyed their time with us tonight. Please make sure that you have signed in on the chat roll to verify your participation in tonight's webinar. August's webinar will be announced soon, but remember the registration links for all PAEA sponsored events are also available on the PAEA website calendar, the PAEA Facebook pages, and through email from me, PAEA's Director of Programming, or your division or region reps. So remember to check your email for the Act 48 link coming soon, which will also have copies of the PowerPoints and many other resources that Heather and Maureen have asked for you to have to make this journey into ochre pigments a little bit easier for you. So unless there are any other questions or comments, looks like lots of thank yous and thank yous and thank yous in the chat, because yes, this is great information and great cross-curricular activities to use in the classroom.
Oh, and I did just check the sheet with the watercolor medium recipe. That has the Kramer Pigments website, Sinopia Pigments, and Natural Pigments all on there. So excellent. Good reputable pigment sources.
Great. Excellent.
That's
all right.
All come in an email then? We'll get that in an email. Okay, awesome.
Yep, you're going to get everything in an email probably within, I already have it ready to go, so you're going to probably have it within about 15 minutes after this is over. So, all right. Well, unless there's anything else, we're going to call that a wrap. And good night, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.